Hello everybody, and welcome to this month's Sustainability Practice Group. With that, I want to hand it over to Mark to get going with today's session. If you have anything you'd like to add about the group, or else we'll go directly on to Ross to start with today's presentation.
Thanks, Matt. So we're going to talk about the new Sustainable Design and Construction Practice Guide today. As many of you know, this is the fifth that CSI has produced. The Project Delivery Guide replaced the Project Resource Manual. There are also guides on construction administration, construction specifications, and product representation. It's my pleasure to introduce Ross with quite the boatload of initials after his name, FAIA, FCSI. Ross, as many of you know, was one of the founders of USGBC, past president of CSI, an author of quite a few books on sustainability. So he volunteered yet again to produce the CSI Sustainable Design and Construction Practice Guide. And I'd like to turn this over to Ross. Then there'll be some discussion, if time allows, on a leadership summit on sustainable design that was held in Minneapolis. But the priority is for Ross's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Matt, for having me as a guest today, and welcome everyone. It's my pleasure to join the group this afternoon, and I'm excited to talk to you about the new Sustainable Design and Construction Practice Guide. If you're fortunate enough to be attending Greenbuild this week in Philadelphia, which starts tomorrow, you will find it for sale in the bookstore. It's the first place that it's being offered for sale, and it will also be at the Wiley booth on the show floor. So with that, let's get into talking about a little bit. As you know, the task team producing the practice guides was set up 4 or 5 years ago by the board as a way of updating and replacing the Project Resource Manual, which was the previous document that capped a long line of information that CSI has produced to assist both practitioners and those wishing to become practitioners learn how to do their job, and also how to continue doing their job once they made it to that level. A couple of years ago, the task team started talking about not just the practice guides we were already going to produce, but also talking about other practice guides that we felt there would be a need for. And out of that discussion, the very first one that came up was one dealing with sustainability. This came about because of the fact that green building and sustainability was becoming more and more important in everyone's practice, whether you were a contractor, an architect, a product representative, or any of the other folks involved in the design and construction process. And the task team looked very deeply at whether we could produce such a guide, whether we had the knowledge base and the personnel to do it, and the answer was a resounding yes. In fact, we had a large number of people that were anxious to contribute. So why did we create the practice guide? And it wasn't because green was easy. That wasn't it. It really was that we felt CSI had some important things to say about this, and we had the knowledge and the ability to produce that. So in doing this, we had our publisher, John Wiley & Sons, who was already signed up to produce the other practice guides. We had to do a proposal to them and convince them, as well as members of the task team originally, whether there would be a market for such a practice guide and whether we could do it. And we went through that process. I'm happy to say that Greg Markling, former president of CSI, took the challenge of compiling that information and producing the outline that initially was submitted to John Wiley & Sons. And the outline really showed that the practice guide was meant to be a compilation of information and recommended practices from CSI's perspective on what sustainable design and construction should be. And over the ensuing 2 years or so that the task team worked on this, we wound up with a very comprehensive and practical guideline for doing just that. There were many, many people who were involved as authors. This was a different scenario for us. In the past, we had produced practice guides with a sole author doing the job, but given where the economy was and the industry was between 2008 and even still so today, we realized it would be very difficult for one person to handle the entire writing of a brand new practice guide from scratch. And so we talked with Greg Markling about a new way of producing practice guides, which was to have a lead author who would not only perhaps write part of it, but also be the one person who would run the effort of all the other authors and make sure that there was consistency between all of the writing that was taking place by individuals. And as a result of that, I think what we wound up with was a very, very useful and helpful practice guide, one that actually has something to say to every member of the design and construction team who is either currently involved in their first green project, one, or those that are considering doing it. It was also meant to give those people who are considering a career in sustainable design or construction enough knowledge to understand if this was going to be for them. And I think we will see as we go through the contents of this practice guide just how we accomplish that. So let's take a look under the hood of the new practice guide. Just a short side story here. Apparently there was some initial release of information about the practice guide coming out, and I started getting emails from CSI members who were trying to find it and buy it, and I found from John Wiley & Sons that it was not yet on the street, so to speak, so you could not go to the CSI website and buy it. But I did have one member who emailed me and said, I'm not sure why, but you can buy the book on the Walmart website. And not believing that that was the case, I went to Walmart's website, entered the title of the book, and sure enough, there it was. You could pre-order it. So that has to say something about this practice guide. If you could have bought it from Walmart. In any event, the contents of the practice guide has 6 chapters that are very, very comprehensive in covering the topic from A to Z. We've added illustrations into this practice guide to help it be more understandable, and I think this has changed somewhat from the earlier practice guides that we have produced. We also have included in this practice guide extensive references to other sources of information. Rather than duplicating information that was produced by others or that appeared elsewhere, we felt it would be more useful to reserve the space for telling CSI side of the story and including source information, references rather, that people could go to and get the rest of the story themselves. And as I mentioned earlier, what was unique about this effort was that we had a team of knowledgeable authors who practice in this field day in, day out, who contributed to different chapters, different parts of the practice guide. We had a host of people, not only internally but externally, who reviewed the practice guide at various stages as it was being written, after the manuscript was produced, and then finally when the page proofs were there. Does that mean it's perfect? No. Does that mean we missed something? Possibly. But I think that that's part of the process. We never intend this to be a static document. We really do intend this to grow over time as the knowledge base increases. And what's also unique is this is the first new practice guide in the series. We will have coming out in the next year a facilities management practice guide as well, so be on the lookout for that. And I think that'll be another unique publication that people might be interested in. So let's take a more in-depth look now at what actually is in the practice guide itself. The first chapter, being introductory, talks about sustainable design and construction. It's not meant to be repetitious of other books that are out there. There are certainly a host of them that detail the reasons why you should do sustainable design and construction, and we did not want to duplicate that, but we also did want to give some introductory information to frame the rest of the practice guide. So this chapter includes definitions that are commonly used in sustainable design and construction, reference to building codes that are covered or that reference sustainable design, what some of the reference standards are, and take a look at some of the green building rating systems that are out there from both a domestic standpoint here in the United States as well as an international standpoint. So it's really an overview chapter. Chapter 2 starts going into much more detail, covering roles and expectations of the design and construction team. And it's broken down into talking about the role and responsibilities of the owner team. Then we talked about the design team. Then it covers product manufacturers and representatives, the contractor team, and then goes into discussing the commissioning agent responsibilities, finishing up with the facility manager. So we tried to look at this from every aspect of people who would be dealing with sustainable design and construction over the life cycle of the project, from conceptualization of the project through operation. Chapter 3 goes on to talk about sustainable design and construction best practices, looking at site optimization, then talking about energy performance and conservation, water use and conservation, materials and resources, environmental quality, and then historic preservation and rehabilitation. Now, you may notice some similarity to the LEED rating system, and I will admit that we did use the LEED rating system as a touchstone to talk about various topics. We discussed this at length, whether it should be one rating system centric, and we decided it wouldn't be, but we did need to choose one rating system just so we could frame the conversation. So you'll see a lot of discussion revolving around the LEED rating system, but that doesn't exclude any other rating systems. There is, where appropriate, mention of Green Globes, mention of BREEAM, mention of ENERGY STAR, etc. And then you may say, well, Ross, that's fine, but why is historic preservation and rehabilitation included in this discussion? That's because the task team felt that the greenest building that can be built is one that already exists and gets repurposed. And we're seeing more and more in today's industry an alignment between historic preservation and rehabilitation and sustainability, and looking at how that really enhances the built environment. So that's why we included that here at this time. Chapter 4, going on to the next, covers green product and system evaluation and leads you step by step through the process of identifying green products. That's part of the process, and also evaluating them for future use. So we'll start with a discussion of identifying the project criteria at the beginning of the project. How do you go about identifying those things that are going to be important to the project? Secondly, once you have that criteria established, your next step would be to make a list, an itemization of what your preferred materials are and product attributes are. So I think those are, that is rather a very key step in the process. Your next step after that would be to evaluate your sustainability options, and then take a look finally at the impact of choice. And all of this is becoming more and more important as LEED version 4 starts rolling out here during Greenbuild. That's the official launch for LEED version 4, and even though LEED version 3, the current version, will remain alive for at least another year, I think it's important to start talking about that, because there are some massive changes in LEED version 4, and Mark, I'm sure you can comment on that as well with your knowledge of it, where we are going to really have to adjust to how we select and specify building products because in LEED version 4 is the first time since the original LEED was released that the LEED steering committee really tinkered very heavily with that category, material and resources.
Ross, that's right, and I'm sure people already have seen there's some firms that are requesting letters from manufacturers saying that if they have environmental product declarations or LCAs, they can get preferential treatment in specifying. There are other manufacturers saying, well, wait a minute, nobody's ever asked for this before. What are we supposed to do? There are other firms who are, embracing this quite a bit. There are others that are talking about skipping credit or two if they can't figure it out. So it's brand new.
Mm-hmm. I agree, Mark. And what's interesting is, too, that I'm now starting to see, I went to a small conference about 2 weeks ago down in Florida and meeting with one-on-one with various product manufacturers from the likes of BSF, Carlisle, and smaller companies, and they're all saying the same thing. They're all talking now about we have an environmental product declaration, or it's underway, we'll have it soon. And I think this is, we're seeing what LEED version 4 is starting to do is push the manufacturing side into new territory, and it's exactly what LEED has done from the very beginning when it was first released. So we as professionals are going to have to adapt to that as well. And you're right. I mean, what I've told people, manufacturers who have expressed concern over changes in LEED version 4 over time, I said, look, these things are credits. They're optional. You don't have to do them. The design professional does not have to choose to do those credits if they find them too onerous. But eventually, I think the marketplace will catch up with LEED version 4, and we'll be joking about how concerned we were about these things in years ahead. So, but I think you're right. That's exactly what we are seeing. Also, some people that are saying, I'm a small company. There's no way that I can do any of this. So there's going to be some upheaval in the marketplace coming as LEED version 4 rolls out and starts taking hold.
And the opportunity is for CSI or USGBC to, what is an EPD? The lead industry has an EPD. Does that mean I should, put lead paint on my wall? So you have to know what you're reading. It's like everything else. That's why we went to school.
That's it.
That's
exactly.
Why we practice.
Right. Thank you. So let's go on then to Chapter 5, which is covering sustainable design and project delivery. This chapter takes a look at different types of project delivery, and it covers different permutations from design, bid, build, which many people are saying is on the way out, to integrated project delivery, which is the preferred method if you're doing a sustainable project. In fact, LEED for Healthcare was the first rating system that included a prerequisite and a credit that you can get for integrated project delivery, and it is in fact firmly embedded in LEED version 4. So that, once again, they're pushing the envelope to say that's necessary, so we'll talk about it here. This chapter also includes discussion of the impact of sustainability on the delivery project process and a discussion of advantages and disadvantages to sustainable projects of each method of project delivery. And I think that's probably the first time that that's been covered in depth anywhere, as far as I know, from the books that I have. And then finally, Chapter 6, Construction Documentation Practices, covers contract issues, how to integrate sustainable design requirements into the contract documents, takes a look at construction specifications and what should be found there related to sustainability, as well as drawings. And this topic of this chapter is something that I've been talking about for years, which is very simply that doing a sustainable project or a LEED project doesn't end when the job goes out to bid. It's only really the beginning. What is so critical and key to being successful in achieving LEED certification or any type of recognition for a sustainable project is following it all the way through construction. And that's why this chapter goes into that depth of talking about construction documentation. But, you know, this is, with the release of this book, it's not the end. It is a continuum. We need to hear back from the people that use it. That's what makes every practice guide better. We have a process set up for all of the practice guides where feedback is reviewed by the author of the practice guide and the task team. If the feedback is found to be justified, depending upon how key it is, if it's a critical issue, it is something that will be posted on the CSI website, and it's also something that Wiley issues when you buy one of the practice guides. There's a website that you register on to show that you purchased the practice guide, and once you do that, you have access to supplemental information. So every time there are corrections to the practice guide that we feel can't wait for the next edition to come out, it's posted there, and there for you as a user, a purchaser of the practice guide has access to it. So please contribute feedback, questions, any experiences you've had with the practice guide, any of them for that matter. In fact, what's happening now in this continuum of process, the task team is now going through to prepare the second edition of the very first practice guide that we released, which is the project delivery. And Walter, who is the author for that, has revised the outline and is starting to work on the second edition. So unlike this first series that we released where we issued 3 practice guides all at once, now that we've got them out there and they've been out on the market for some time, we're going to stagger how we release the second editions of each of the practice guides. So obviously with this just now being published, it'll be a while before the second edition is out, but I promise you the feedback and input that we get will be looked at, will be held if it's not critical for the next edition. So please, I encourage you to contribute to make the guide better. We intend that this guide will evolve as the green sustainable industry evolves. We don't expect it to stay stagnant. Be part of the improvement process, please. And so at this point, I thank you for your time and listening. And Mark and Matt, I'll turn this back over to you for questions and discussion. Thanks.
Thanks, Ross. Yes, before we get to the second part of the presentation about summary of the Sustainable Design Conference that was held last month, Design Futures Council, a couple questions. Would you see, since you're the senior specification writer in your firm, would you see using the guide in your firm? If you're a green leader in your firm, how would you use this to help the other people?
Well, I think, Mark, I would, and the reason I would is because no matter how much knowledge I have, it's good to have a reference text that you can give to people who are interested in learning more about this, whether they're the younger person starting in the firm who wants to have a focus on sustainability while they're doing the job that they were hired to do, or whether they are the more seasoned professional that really hasn't worked in this area before. I think it's a good primer and a good reference source. So I have it here. Obviously, it's sitting on my desk and is available to anybody in the firm that wants to use it. But the issue will be getting it available to all of our offices, because not everybody's sitting in this office that I'm in. We have multiple offices. So yeah, I would say this is a great resource for people wanting to have it in their firm library. And I don't think it's available electronically, and I might be wrong, but that's my recollection. Maybe it is available as an electronic publication. I think it is, now that I'm thinking about it, not because of this one, but some other discussions that we've had with some other practice guides. We've had some institutional users that have wanted to get like 200 copies, or they wanted something that they could read on a Kindle or a tablet. And I think Wiley does have it available that way. So I'm going to assume there is a way to get this electronically. Now, I don't think that means you can put it on your network, but it means at least that you can get it as a download and have it on those types of devices if you wanted to share it with people amongst the firm. Hope that answered that.
Yes, thanks, Ross. Matt, do you show any questions?
We just had one question. Well, actually, two. Alice had asked if the slides would be available for anyone that would like to review this information. So, Ross, as long as you're okay with that, I'll share the slides along with the recording when I post that later this week. And then additionally, a question about if there's any board-level conversation, and I'm not sure if, Ross, you've been part of any of this conversation about potentially developing a certificate or certification program around sustainability, since most of our other practice guides that we have do also follow in line as the curriculum for other CSI certifications.
There has not been conversation regarding that. This happens to be one that was, as the facility management is, they were not developed to initially with the eye toward developing a certification or certificate program, but that is something, of course, that the certification committee and technical committee could discuss and make a recommendation to the board, or it could come the other way from the board. But as of the time that we worked on this, that was not part of the initial concept of producing this practice guide, was that it would result in a certificate or certification program. But that could change.
I know that it was discussed in the Education Committee certification, and but the body of knowledge, there was some investigation, but it was so wide and takes so long. I think that there were people in the Education Committee who felt that there were other organizations who were offering different types of green seminars, some really targeted, some general. So. It takes 4 or 5 years actually to develop that sort of thing.
Yep, I agree.
All right. Well.
Mark.
Ross.
I was just going to add, we have a couple additional comments popping in here. One from Wade Bevier on the call saying that as of right now, it's currently not being discussed in the certification committee as well. So it may be one of those things that down the road, if it gets to that level, but for now it is not in the immediate plans, it looks like.
Okay.
Additionally, we have some conversations here that we have. Edward Heinen has asked, does the guide also cover site and landscape sustainability issues, or does it focus solely on building?
It covers site and sustainability only from the standpoint of one of the categories, and I'll back up on my slides for a minute. It only deals here in Chapter 3 within the broad overall concept of sustainability with site optimization. So it doesn't focus on something specific to site work, just touches it as part of the process. So I don't think it goes in depth as perhaps is being questioned.
All right. Jonathan just adds that it's also slightly covered in Chapter 4 as well. So information there as well.
Yeah.
I don't have any additional questions at this point. I'll give it a few seconds for anybody else who would like to add in. But at this point, I guess, Mark, do you want me to just go back to the general introduction slide for the second half of this, or did you prepare anything?
Well, you can leave this slide up. What I have is a summary. The Design Futures Council held a leadership summit on sustainable design in Minneapolis over 2 days, actually over 3 days, and CSI participated in different ways. Paul Bertram was there. There were 100 delegates, and I thought I've got a 6-page summary that Matt will put up a link on, but it's basically single-spaced summary, so it's not set up as a slide, and I wanted to just verbally highlight some things about the conference that I think people will find interesting, some statistics and other pieces. And first I should apologize for going to the dentist on the same day I'm speaking because I am lisping, which I don't normally do. But so these 100 delegates were from industry, they were from design firms, The opening presentation, Arup, your basic engineering firm that's working on 30,000 projects at any given time. Chris Lubicman, their director for Global Foresight, pointed out that when they look forward, what's past sustainability, perhaps that the next two steps are resilience and adaptation. Resilience meaning, how could you recover or design to recover, even after the terrible storm they had in the Philippines and Indonesia. That would be resilience. And then adaptation, well, today I live in a tree, tomorrow I live in a boat, the day after I live in a hotel. How do we keep moving as the world keeps changing? Chris points out that change is constant. He mentioned that the future is fiction by necessity, that we really have proven through engineering capabilities that we can change the future. The U.S. is actually ahead of its goals on sustainability. There are no power plants projected to be built between now and 2025, and if we continue to conserve, we won't need a new power plant till 2040. Even the coal people are starting to use gas. But then there's China, and they're bringing a new coal-fired power plant online, one a month. Chris's opinion is that everything inconvenient will change, and that in the design professions you have an ambient intelligence that we know how to solve a lot of problems. The next speaker was Lynn Scarlett from the Nature Conservancy, talking about sustainable design beyond buildings. She pointed out that over 80% of the people in the U.S. live in cities, and that urban greening is essential. Tree cover is decreased in the U.S. by 30%. 340 million trees have been removed. The impact, that's a $100 billion impact on stormwater management because we've got so much hard surface. The air conditioning loads on the buildings are increased. She also pointed out that per person per day in the U.S. we use 161 gallons of water a day. There are in the document, Green City Clean Waters. The City of Philadelphia has moved forward. There's a greening organization for cities, ICLEI, and that'll be in the handout, which you can download with a click from Matt, and then her website, lynnscarlett.com. Again, I'm trying to summarize 2 days in less than 20 minutes. Ad Mezeria, Architecture 2030, asks, how are you leading? How are you doing leading? Points out, again, that urban environments emit 75% of the global greenhouse gases. They feel the climate is stable at 350 parts per million of CO2, but we're already at 396 million parts per million. And the primary cause is, burning the fossil fuels. The UN panel has endorsed a ceiling on global emissions, but it's really up to the U.S. and China because they use 53% of the world's total. However, if we can hold our global peak emissions before 2020, then the feeling is that the environment can recover. But in 20 years, China's cities will have added 350 million people. 350 million people in 20 years. And I think many of us know that the number one English-speaking country in the world is China, because I think that there's 300 million school kids. In the U.S., of course, it's our native language, but we have to look globally. In 2025, China will have 221 cities with more than 1 million people, compared to Europe with 35 cities with more than 1 million people. I guess we're going to be busy. McKinsey Global says that there's a projected 900 billion square feet of new and rebuilt buildings that need to be constructed in cities by 2030. 900 billion square feet, 3.5 times of what is already built in the U.S. There are, again, references in this information packet that you can download because there have been many conferences on this nationally. California is out front again. They want to get to zero net energy for residential by 2025, commercial by 2030. Really what we have to do is just deploy our best available technology. Getting to net zero, there's a conference coming up for that as well. So there is a new website, 2030palette.org, which will have best practices for sustainability online, comparing 55 elements of sustainability, 2030palette.org. And again, you can go to EdSite 2030challenge.org. Now, there was a panel presentation pointing out that some of the metrics, the U.S. is the 47th healthiest country in the world. 20% of our dollars are spent on health care. The new paradigm should really have human well-being at the center. Economic vitality can result, ecological and restoration can result. Obesity is a non-communicable disease. It looks like a disease of place and environment, and we can do something about that. Chicago has a major initiative on the healthier neighborhoods, making sure that everybody has good access to food security, just having a supermarket in your neighborhood. It's been graphed around the country. It's startling how far some people have to go to get fresh produce. There's an integrated valuation, another acronym, integrated evaluation of environmental services and trade-offs, INVEST. There's a website that will let you know what's where. The next presentation was by Colonel Mac Mickleby on sustainability, a 21st century American grand strategy. A Marine who still swears a lot in his presentations, but it keeps your attention. But he really believes that sustainability is key to we need a strategic global ecology. We need to win-win, not win-lose. All the countries need to work. He's a little concerned about stranded assets. If we start using gas, which is readily available, and skip the oil, we're stranding $27 trillion of hydrocarbons underground. When you add in the coal, revalued to maybe $7 trillion for all the people and companies that are invested in those hydrocarbons. It's going to be a global shift, very hard for them to repurpose. He's a believer in walkable communities, regenerative architecture, resource productivity. Again, the New America Foundation is his website, some very interesting information. Also presenting were the corporate chief sustainability officers for Armstrong, Medtronic, 3M, and a staggering statistic from my point of view that 94% of materials used in manufacturing a product in the U.S. are thrown away before the product hits the shelves. 94% of the materials used in manufacturing a product in the U.S. are thrown away before the product hits the shelves. 70% of corporate offices are empty at any given time. Less brick and mortar in the future. 3M was pointing out that they do allow innovation time as up to 15% for their research staff working on their own proposals to the benefit of the company. Perhaps that just means skip your lunch hour for the company, but it is a forward-thinking approach to allow for innovation time. The next speaker was, there's a book called Blindsided. Jim Harris was the author. He pointed out that we have the garden planet of the universe. His opinion was if we just turned off the phantom power, used the technology we already had, we'd really be all set if we all switched to white roofs. His opinion that we'd save $2 trillion in CO2 emissions. He put out the statistic that 1 hour of sun equals all the power consumed on the earth per hour. He also had the statistic that in a LEED building, $11.33 square foot higher in rent, 4.1% higher occupancy rate in a lead building. And then he pointed out that Janine Benya's book on biomimicry was out there. Shuki Einstein with the Green Energy and Economic Development Group did some case studies, again perhaps available on the Design Futures Council site, about Star Peak Energy, Niobrara Energy Park, the Lefdell Mine, where everything from mines and tunnels are being repurposed. In the case of the Lefdell Mine in Norway, they took a 1 million square foot mine, turned it into a data center using the water from the fjords to cool it. The next speaker was Dan Watts from Perkins & Will with the 2030 Challenge and Zero Energy Costs. He shared their approaches and design approaches at Perkins & Will. They found that it's very useful to consider adjacent buildings for reheat and shared opportunities. You know, the energy and power for your building. If you have too much, there must be a building next door that can use some. If you have a little, not quite enough, there must be some that you can borrow. It's something that I hadn't heard before. Vision glass is they're really doing a lot of research on that. You know how we have sunglasses that get darker as the light comes on. Well, why not your insulating glass, as well as chemical sensors coming into buildings, so you have demand control, ventilation. It takes a lot of energy sometimes to do dry storage. Takes even more to use freezers, and so knowing how materials act and are preserved, you have to look at the technology. They look at a lot of strategies with less than a 1-year payback. He also pointed out that 2.5% of the worldwide water is fresh. Only 2.5% of the worldwide water is fresh. 10% of that is used for domestic use. The rest is for industrial use. You know, you can draw your own conclusions on that. Perkins & Will believes that productivity is greater in healthy buildings. They're doing some metrics. And he pointed out a new book called Body Burden, where apparently there are now 258 chemicals in newborn babies that didn't exist 7 years ago. So of course their mothers are passing on the chemicals to the newborns. But how are our bodies and how are the babies' bodies to cope with things that nature didn't equip them? The next speaker, Sustaining Profitable Growth in Professional Services Firm, Jonathan Burns at MIT. If you need a profitability consultant, he's who I would hire. He's done books on Islands of Profit in a Sea of Red Ink, Who's Managing Profitability, believes that a firm should have a profitability manager, and 30 to 40% of anybody's business is unprofitable by any measure, but we keep going after it, and that 20 to 30% of any business is so profitable that it provides all the reported earnings and subsidizes the loss. So Jonathan's message was managing profitability in a firm isn't a, you know, you have to look at it. Increasing revenue, decreasing expenditures does not maximize profit. You have to match cost and revenues on a micro basis, perhaps a person-to-person basis, and that he's seen firms that have a 30% profit increase, no additional investment, just by knowing what they're doing, protecting their islands of profit, finding similar ones and nurturing them. He suggests that firms look by employee at the revenue, gross margin, and so and finally he said, have a value war, not a price war, for your profitable clients. There were a number of graphs that showed, you know, you have whales and minnows. The whales are the ones that have the opportunity to feed your firm or be the most nurturing. Norman Strong with the Miller-Hull Partnership did the Bullitt Center. It's billed as one of the world's greenest office buildings, Bullitt, B-U-L-L-I-T-T. They used the Living Building Challenge 2.0, and he mentioned that they purchased the slowest elevator they could find and built an irresistible stair. So the stair is actually quite beautiful with views, heavy timber frame, and so people are encouraged to walk. They have composting toilets on all 6 floors, which was its own challenge, rainwater collection, solar panels overhang the street, and for the Living Building Challenge, they finally gave up trying to find a door that met it, so they were using recycled doors. A couple more speakers. Nicole Dosso with Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, young woman who's in charge of the World Trade Center rebuild that SOM is doing now, One World Trade Center. At 7 World Trade Center, they were working with the LEED 4.0 core and shell pilot and found it quite useful. At One World Trade Center, it really your first floor office is 118 feet off the ground. There's a 500,000 square feet below grade at that building, concrete core, and the tenant fit out is going on now. Bill Helmuth of HOK, one of the founders, spoke on leadership through sustainable design. HOK, of course, has had a sustainable design guide for a long time. They developed the GSA Sustainable Design Guide and the DC Green Building Act guides and the Urban Planning Policy and Guidelines for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. His presentation talked about using active glass facades. Vivian Lofness, who is, I believe, the Dean of the Architecture School at Carnegie Mellon, Design for Sustainable and Shared Quality of Life, did a fine presentation. She's a believer in shared access to affordable energy, really stopping the vampire loads that are really a waste that can be designed out and are being designed out of a lot of new computer equipment. They've had an area at Carnegie Mellon where very few painted finishes, a sort of a experimental office center on the roof with access flooring, natural ventilation, very few lights, and pointed out there's a website, waterscapes.com, that talks about shared access to fresh water. She believes that green roofs have a triple bottom line for profit, people, and planet, and pointed out that we really need shared access to transportation and mobility. 33% of the population is disabled at any given time in a car-only environment. People who are poor, people who are disabled, people who are elderly, and that happens to all of us at different times. And then finally, in the discussion around with the delegates at the conference, 3 things. Someone, and I don't actually know these statistics for sure, but if the USGBC has 12,000 members, they did announce that about 1,200 members voted in LEED version 4 and 86% carried it. I was surprised that more USGBC members didn't vote for a key initiative. People are starting to talk about health product declarations, which are advocated by a particular publisher. Firms are issuing letters to manufacturers saying that they'll consider their products favorably if they have EPDs and HPDs. There have been some attorneys and some sessions on the internet lately about what's the liability of the designer who's not trained as a chemist to try and understand a health product declaration. There are chemicals that stay in a product. There are chemicals that outgas. It's a whole new learning experience for most of us. And then lastly, there's a new product transparency declarations being promoted by the flooring organizations where they declare their content and their red lists that match up with 6 of the more well-researched red lists, including the government pieces, as opposed to I believe the Health Product Declaration, which is a good program, but draws from 30 red lists. So, as many years as I've been doing this, I'm sure as many years as Ross has been doing this, there's always so much to learn, and that's what kind of makes it wonderful. You're working on a project. Well, sure, we're working on one project at a time, but how does the world change? One project at a time. With that, I'd like to thank you for attending this session. Thank Ross again for the time he spent developing the practice guide on sustainability for CSI.